Madam President, this Congress, Democrats have shown up for everyday Americans. We passed historic legislation to build infrastructure. We became a global leader in chip manufacturing. We improved gun safety. We protected our climate. These are wins for Americans, and they make headline news. But today I want to talk about an issue that may not get the headlines, but it's just as important to fixing our broken student loan system, ensuring that Americans can go to school and participate fully in our economy and maintain our nation's competitive edge. I'm talking about holding for-profit colleges accountable. I've been coming to the floor for almost 10 years on this topic. I believe in my heart of hearts that what's going on here is unfair to students, their families, and taxpayers. Why is it essential to bring this issue up frequently? Two numbers, and these two will be on the final, so pay close attention. The numbers are 8 and 30. For-profit colleges enroll only 8% of America's college students, 8%. They account for 30% of federal student loan defaults. How can that be? 8% of the students and 30% of the student loan defaults? The answer is obvious. The schools charge too much, they offer too little. Those who don't drop out end up with worthless diplomas. In a sentence, that's the problem. It's built on a business model, this for-profit college business. It's not built on an educational model. First, for-profit colleges deliberately lure in first-generation and low-income students. Slick marketing that community colleges can't even match. Second, they pressure students to take on as much debt as possible to pay for the courses, and they charge a lot more than community colleges in offering good quality educational courses. Third, once the students are enrolled and on the hook for huge amounts of debt, these for-profit colleges provide low-quality education and very little support. If a student graduates from a for-profit college and ends up with a degree that's practically worthless, finding a working job that will pay them any kind of money to pay back the loan is next to impossible. They can barely cover basic living expenses, much less pay back their student debt. I've been calling for greater scrutiny and accountability over the for-profit college industry for years. Despite the well-documented misconduct and fraud of this nefarious industry, the Department of Education continues to provide billions in federal funds to them each year. Under the Trump administration and former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, for-profit colleges had just an absolute holiday. We witnessed crucial protections like gainful employment rule, which puts sanctions on the worst performing schools, being rescinded. Early on, Secretary DeVos said she was going to prioritize individual students. Instead, by removing these safeguards and accountability, she left them even more vulnerable to the unscrupulous for-profit colleges. The DeVos Education Department even refused to provide defrauded borrowers with loan discharges they deserved under borrower defense. After Secretary DeVos's indefensible borrower defense policies were struck down in federal court, she continued to refuse to act even after the court ruled against her, allowing a backlog to build up, listen to this, 230,000 student borrowers who languished under mountains of debt that Secretary DeVos would not remedy in any way. The Trump-DeVos Education Department left borrowers hopeless and buried in debt while the taxpayers footed the bills. As I said, I've called for more accountability over the for-profit college industry for a long time. Luckily, the Biden administration's listening and reversed the course done under the Trump administration. I hope it continues to be the case. Unlike the Trump-DeVos Department of Education, President Biden's department has processed borrower defense claims as the law requires. This has canceled the student loan debt of nearly 1.1 million borrowers who were defrauded and swindled by predatory for-profit colleges. Legendary names like Corinthian College, ITT Tech, Westwood turned out to be the worst excuses for higher education in America's history. And it's enabled these students to get a chance to start again, to make up for time lost in a bitter experience with a for-profit school. The Biden administration also issued sweeping student debt relief, which disproportionately helps lower income students, which is the way it should be. Borrowers who attended for-profit colleges borrow an average of $40,700. That's average for each student. 71% do not graduate on time or at all. 71% of for-profit school students. For those who do graduate, they often have degrees that are worthless and jobs that are worthless as well. If the Supreme Court approves President Biden's student loan relief plan, it will help millions of borrowers climb out from the mountain of debt, pay their bills, and even return to a higher education experience that's worthwhile. To curb future wrongdoings, the Biden administration has also terminated federal recognition of a sketchy accrediting agency that long ago failed to meet the mark, which long ago kept these for-profit schools in business when it shouldn't have. It's taken the steps, too, to close the infamous 90-10 loophole. That's a loophole that basically says for-profit colleges do not count GI Bill and service member benefits as part of their revenue from the federal government, resulting in some schools generating more than 90% of their revenues from federal tax dollars. Listen to what these schools do. They lure kids into the for-profit college experience. They promise them the sun, the moon, and the stars. Many of them are the first generation of their families to ever get near a college. Their parents can't give much advice because they don't have any lasting experience to draw from. The students are told, add up your debt and don't worry about it. You're going to pay it all back with a wonderful job that waits in your future. It turns out to be a fraud on them, their families, and the public, and the taxpayers end up holding the bag. This for-profit industry is taking advantage of veterans too, and the GI Bill of Rights was not designed to be wasted on for-profit schools. Looking ahead, we need to take steps to ensure that students are protected and there's real supervision and reform. That's why I recently introduced the Proprietary Education Interagency Oversight Coordination Improvement Act, which has got to be the longest title of any bill that I've ever introduced. It creates an interagency task force with the Departments of Education, Justice, Labor, Veterans Affairs, and Defense to improve coordination in dealing with the for-profit college industry. This is a serious problem. When I think of the thousands of young people that I'm aware of who've been defrauded by these for-profit schools, I say shame on us, shame on the Department of Education. Let's do right by these young people. I yield the floor.